of the responsibilities that I have, still learning what they all are, is to prepare and submit the page for our presbytery in the mission yearbook for prayer and study. And the theme for 2011 is Growing Christ Church Deep and Wide, an initiative of the General Assembly from the 218th General Assembly. There are 4 areas in which we are encouraged to grow Christ Church deep and wide: in servanthood, in discipleship, in evangelism, and in diversity. And we were asked to choose one of those areas and to write stories about what our presbytery is up to in one of those areas. And I chose diversity, and I did that on purpose. As Dave and I were talking, he said, yes, Indiana is not just about corn. I wanted people to know that diversity is important for us here in this presbytery in the Midwest. And of course, I couldn't tell a story of diversity without telling a story of United Presbyterian Church in Bloomington. So I spoke of you and of the Korean New Church Development at First Church Bloomington. I spoke of Seymour and of their Spanish language worship, and I spoke of Central Church in Terre Haute with a nested Korean congregation, and Unity Presbyterian Church in Terre Haute, and with their commitment to be a multicultural congregation, the same commitment that you have made. My thinking about diversity, about the importance of diversity, comes from this text in the book of Ruth, a chapter that your pastor read so well. I loved hearing him read that story to you. Elimelech and his family left the house of bread, which is what Bethlehem means, because there was a famine in the land and no bread in the house. And they went of all places to Moab. In the Hebrew Bible, Moab is known as a place of evil and idolatry. Nothing good could come from that place. But there they are, Elimelech and his wife Naomi and their 2 sons, who eventually marry Moabite women. And the men die, one after another, and the 3 women are left in an impossible situation. It is a time when life depended on men. Livelihood and food and shelter and identity all depended on men, and there they were, 3 women, 3 widows, stripped of all the things they needed to survive. Naomi knows what she needs to do. She hears that there is food in Bethlehem once more, that there is bread in Bethlehem once more, and so it is time for her to go home and try to find a life with her own people. She also knows what her daughters-in-law need to do. They are still young. They can go home to their parents, and they can find a good husband, and they can raise families. After some argument, Orpah kisses her mother-in-law. She sees the wisdom of Naomi's position. She kisses her and returns home. It is a reasonable, logical, sane thing to do. But Ruth is another matter. She clings to Naomi and vows to remain with her in what are some of the most beloved words of all Scripture. And I'll read these to you from the King James Bible. Entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. Where thou diest, I will die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if aught but death parts thee and me. It was a foolhardy move in a world where life depends on men. Naomi is silenced by Ruth's commitment, and the 2 travel to Bethlehem, where it is time for the barley harvest. Bereft and on their own, Naomi and Ruth were consigned to live the life of the poor. Ruth gleaned in the fields among the grain, and this was gleaning in the fields of grain that had been left by the harvesters, so that she and Naomi survived on the leftovers of the rich. She eventually appeared in the fields of Boaz, who, as it turns out, is a relative of her late husband. Now, gleaning in the fields was dangerous work for a woman alone. Ruth was vulnerable and likely to be harassed or violated. But when Boaz learned who she was, he was moved by her devotion to Naomi, and he took steps to protect her and to treat her kindly. When Naomi learns in whose fields her daughter-in-law has gleaned, she comes up with a plan. Now, I won't tell you all the details. I hope that you read the book for yourself. You can do that this afternoon. It's a very short read. I will say, though, that through the cleverness of Naomi, the boldness of Ruth, and the kindness of Boaz, there is a marriage. And then there is a baby. The women of Bethlehem who greeted Naomi when she returns from Moab now gather around to celebrate the birth. They say to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without next of kin, and may his name be renowned in all Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has borne him." In a world where life depends on men, a daughter-in-law becomes worth more than 7 sons. But that is not all. For the book of Ruth has a surprise for us at the very end. The very last words of the book. They named him Obed. This is the son that Ruth and Boaz had. They named him Obed. He became the father of Jesse, the father of David. David. The story of Ruth is the story of a foreigner who gives birth to the grandfather of Israel's greatest king. Just when they thought that nothing good could come from Moab, something great comes from Moab. The story of Ruth is an important story. It is a story of walls that were not built, of circles that were not drawn. Ruth could have drawn a circle around her own pain at losing her husband. In a world where life depends on men, Ruth could have drawn a circle that left her mother-in-law, Naomi, out. She could have gone back to her own family. But she did not draw that circle that kept her mother-in-law on the outside. The people of Bethlehem could have drawn their own circles, circles that would have excluded Ruth because she was a Moabite, but they did not draw that circle. Now, Naomi almost drew a circle that kept Ruth out, and her own bitterness and hopelessness and her sense of propriety concerning a woman's place, but in the end, she did not draw that circle. Boaz could have drawn a circle too. A rich man with much work to do didn't need to concern himself with a couple of poor widows. But he did not draw that circle. The story of Ruth is an important story for us in a day when too many circles are drawn, when circles are drawn that shut out people who are different. Now, I know I'm preaching to the choir here because you don't draw those circles. But it happens so much in our day. People are excluded for all kinds of reasons because of race, gender, age, nationality, economic status, marital status, religion, creed, appearance, physical, mental, or emotional ability. Many of us have known the pain of exclusion. For some, it's a lifetime of exclusion. For others, a moment or two. But we have known its pain. And you'd think that would prevent us from drawing circles, but sometimes just the opposite is true. And so just when we need it is the story of Ruth, the story of Ruth who could have drawn circles, who could have decided to look out for herself. It would have made sense even. It would have meant security. It would have been the smart thing to do. But the story of Ruth calls us away from conventional wisdom so that we may find ourselves in the foolish wisdom of God. The story of Ruth calls us away from conventional wisdom so that we may find ourselves, so that we may find our heart's true home.